Today, I'm going to share 2 interviews, incredible journeys toward creativity, and along the way, you're going to learn some tips how you can discover who you are as an artist. Have you ever felt deep within that there's something more you're supposed to be doing, but you're not sure what? Have you ever felt like you're producing a lot, but not expressing at all? Welcome to She Made It. I'm your host, Elle Zimmerman, and I am on a mission to help you cultivate meaning through the path of creativity. Join me to eavesdrop on conversations with brave women who broke through their resistances into a life of authenticity. Because I believe if she made it, you can too. Welcome, Clara.
Hi, Elle.
Hi, Clara.
So glad to be here.
Yeah, I am so excited about today's episode because it's unusual. We brought in 2 guests who are sisters.
Right.
Both creative, inspirational women on very different paths.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we actually recorded Hannah's episode first, and it was great, but we thought, how fun would it be to bring in her sister Esther and sort of hear how 2 people with the same very creative upbringing chose to walk out their journeys and express themselves as artists. Both of them are working artists, but in very different ways with very different philosophies.
Yeah, and I met both of them when I was coaching acting for a school that my kids attended, and they were both auditioning for the same musical, and I met them at the same exact moment, and I've been able to watch them travel on their paths, and I also know their mom, who's a lovely woman, and she shared some tips. She's not going to be on the podcast today, but she shared some tips on how to nurture creativity in our children. And now these 2 lovely women are the result of her nurturance.
Right. So for any of our listeners who are moms, I think it's going to be fascinating to hear how cultivating creativity in your kids plays out when they're adults. And also for anybody who knows that they're an artist, but has tried lots of different paths and is still just trying to find their niche, I think this episode is going to be really helpful in helping people clarify what that is.
Well, hello, Hannah. How are you today?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you?
I am great. I was wondering, where are you right now? What part of the country?
Right now, I'm in New York City. I am living in Brooklyn, and I work as an illustrator for an ad agency in the middle of Midtown Manhattan.
But you're living in Brooklyn.
Living in Brooklyn.
So you do the morning commute and afternoon commute every day?
Oh, yes, that's something that's the worst part of living in New York, but yes.
Yeah. And how long have you been in the city?
I've been here about a year and a half now.
Okay. Was it easy to acclimate, or was it a bump for you?
Well, I lived in Chicago for several years, so I was used to living in a big city, dealing with public commuting. But then I spent a year in Savannah, Georgia for my master's degree. And so that was quite a culture shock coming from Slovenia, the deep south, all the way up to New York. That took a few months to adjust, but I think I'm acclimating now.
I've shared with our listeners a little bit about how I know you and that we worked together when you were in high school, actually, and then in college, and that you sort of started your journey in the performing arts and then transitioned into visual art. And I, first of all, I love Savannah and I love SCAD, and I actually didn't know you were only there for a year, so you must have been a whiz kid.
Well, I was so fortunate. I spent a year there, and it was a wonderful, wonderful formative year. And I was approached by the CFO of FCB, which is where I now work. He had seen my portfolio, and he said, "You're really weird. I could use some of that in my office. Would you be willing to come and interview, and maybe we can come up with a job for you?" And you don't really say no to opportunities like that plop into your lap. So
That's awesome.
Moving to New York and finishing up remotely. My SCAD was really wonderful and flexible to let me do that.
That's really cool. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So the past year, I was full-time student and a full-time grad student and a full-time employed.
Yeah. So are you finished with your degree from SCAD?
I am. I finished about 6 months ago.
Oh, that's awesome. Congratulations. Yeah. So Hannah, I remember the very first time I met you, it was when you were auditioning for Beauty and the Beast in high school. And then you ended up playing Belle, and we worked together. And really, I just got to know you and know your heart for the arts, and also saw your talents as an illustrator. But you really, really were drawn to the performing side of art. Can you share a little bit about, sort of your journey beyond your, high school into college, and sort of what the process was for you in discovering who you really, really are now as an artist?
Sure, sure. One thing I've kind of learned over the years is that people are, you're an artist. You're not a visual artist or a performer or a singer. I think there's an artistic and creative soul, and there's a lot of different channels that can be expressed in. And for a very long time, performing and singing and acting was what did that for me. I always held on to the drawing, and I was drawing constantly, even while I was doing that. And I went to college for vocal performance, went to a couple colleges and moved around a bit in undergrad, and found that it wasn't really fulfilling me creatively as much as like the drawing was. I felt like I was interpreting other people's works instead of creating my own. And that's what led me to the realization that, oh, maybe I should be spending more of my time in visual arts.
Yeah, and just to interject for a minute here, I remember even when you started your path, you were given a lot of opportunity to do the drawing. I think you might have been offered scholarships, and you really very specifically chose the performing path. And I just the story about moving from college to college to college, I relate. I did the same thing, but I think for me, maybe stepping back a little bit and watching you, it was maybe trying to find what you were looking for in terms of yourself as an artist. And in that process of trying to find the right program or the right teacher or it was just so interesting to me to watch how then it all sort of circled back to the drawing.
Right. Well, I was very stubborn as a youth. And my parents were saying, well, yes, you've got some talent in performing, but you're really good at drawing. I think you should really consider doing that. And I was getting that information from a lot of people, but I was very, very determined. No, performing's what I want to do. I love this rush of being on stage.
And Hannah, you were really, really good at it.
Oh,
so just like you're as talented with now the illustration work that you're doing, you were also incredible on stage. So I think that becomes confusing for people. It becomes about what do I want, and what's, like you said, you were getting the feeling of the rush in the moment. And so it's hard when you're good at so many things.
Well, I think I've been blessed with the ability to work very, very hard at something. So when I determined I'm going to be a performer, and I poured all of my heart, soul, energy, and time into that. And by doing that, you become good at something. And then when I decided the same thing about illustration, I was able to pour myself into that. And I absolutely foresee a future where something else grabs my interest, and that's what I pour myself into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's also walking through the doors of opportunity when they come.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things that strikes me, I love your art. It's odd job art. And I remember, you started drawing the alphabet, and people have to check that out. It's super cool. Tell me sort of the inspiration behind the style of your work now, like what I see on your website now.
Sure. That's hard. It comes from a whole lot of places. My mother is an educator, and she had shelves and shelves and shelves of these wonderful, beautifully illustrated picture books. And I would just pore over those, and I absorbed a lot of really good art that way. And that's always stuck with me. If you look at my work now, there's still an element of, there's a little childhood element. There's still kind of a whimsy and a softness, even though I do sometimes deal with darker subject matter. So that's definitely been a huge influence. My first year in college, I went for fine arts, and I was exposed to a lot of different art histories. I found like the Dutch Renaissance and a lot of like early religious artwork. That imagery really speaks to me, and it pops up in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and then when you talk about the art that you have right now, um, who would you say it gravitates towards your style? Who are your fans? Who are your customers? Do you know? Do you know?
People who are a little bit weird, who are kind of resonate with something that's approachable but a little offbeat. I'm working right now in a for a pharmaceutical advertising agency, and that seems to really resonate with a lot of doctors, surprisingly.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So, are you drawing like bodies, or are you drawing like, I guess, what would you mostly say you're drawing now?
I draw everything. I've really found myself in a wonderful job. They'll bring me in on like new ideas, and they say, this is kind of, we're doing fatty liver, and this is kind of how the drug works. And so I get to go and visualize, well, this could be considered, we could do it with mouths, we could do it with monsters. This is kind of like a machine, and I get to just try to make sense of these big medical terms and put them into an interesting, succinct, compelling illustration. So it's very challenging for me, but it's very open to some very odd illustrations.
That is so cool. It's like almost you're taking the concept of the infographic, where it's very corporate, very organized, and then you're trying to make it, I mean, fantastical almost.
Right. And it's very fast paced. I'm doing something new probably every 3 or 4 days. So it's keeps me on my toes
Do you draw for fun?
all the time. I'm very fortunate where I've got a little studio set up in my apartment, and I'll go home after work and I'll just draw. Even though I'm spending 8 hours a day drawing for work, it's at the end of the day, it's not my work for myself. So I get really energized to go home and spend a few hours just drawing whatever comes to mind.
And is that what we see on your website? Is it that style, that kind of drawing?
Predominantly, I do like to experiment a little more. I like to try to come up with different medias, different ways of expressing ideas. And sometimes I just I'll put on my noise canceling headphones and just try to turn my brain off and just see what comes out on the page. It's very cathartic.
And would you, because you seem to have said the word weird several times, would you categorize it, all of it as weird? I just love that word.
It's a good word. No, I wouldn't say it is exclusively, but that's what I get the most pleasure out of drawing, and it seems to be what comes most naturally to me.
Mm-hmm. And you said something that I think is really powerful. You talk about the rush of being on stage, and there is something really magical about being in front of a live audience and that reciprocal energy of a performance. Do you experience anything like that now as an illustrator?
I do a little bit. I get the opportunity to be in front of clients, and whenever there's illustration ideas, they bring me up to pitch them. So I get put on the spot, and I have to present my ideas. And I do find myself thinking back to some of our times together back in high school, like, okay, don't clinch. It's absolutely come in handy.
Yeah, that's great. So knowing that you're still, growing into yourself as an artist, and you've had this performing arts and this now visual arts, which I love how you describe it as it doesn't have to be defined that way. It's really more just artist.
Mm-hmm.
With the wisdom that you have now on your journey, what would you tell your younger self?
I would encourage my younger self to be more flexible. I had a very set idea of what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go, how my life was going to look. And I think I shut myself off from some opportunities by being so rigid in my vision.
And I do know that you sort of stepped outside of convention, I think, from your family. Not that your family's all super creative, super artistic, in so many different areas. It's interesting because your brother is an architect. You have another brother going into performing art or vocal, arts. Your sister's acting. I can't wait to see what the youngest two are doing. But your family, coming from the Midwest, the Cincinnati area, it is a very conventional, a little bit more conservative part of the country. Did you find it challenging to really be you, not only with, like you said, as a younger self, being more flexible, but also really stepping into the truth of who you are, knowing maybe perhaps the expectations of, family, geography, that kind of stuff?
Sure. I mean, of course, that's something I struggled with. I think to a certain extent, it's something I still do and probably always will. But I had a very wonderful, close group of friends in high school who were all very weird, and we all kind of encouraged each other in that. We were a pretty bizarre little bunch, so that nurtured that spirit in me. My mother likes to say, "Why do you draw this way? What did we do to you? You had such a lovely, loving upbringing. Where did all of this come from?" And I can honestly say I have no idea.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's fantastic though. And she's so proud because I know your mom, and she's so proud because she'll ask you to do, poster art for a theater production, and she's very, very clear to let everyone know in her way that, it was drawn by you. So, yeah, and it always, yeah, they're so proud. If it in, it sounds like getting this job sort of offered to you because it was so clear that you were unique, you were talented, and it came to you so easily through, your time at SCAD. I guess what other resistances, you were in Chicago for a while to make decision to go back for your MFA. What would you say were the biggest challenges or resistances that you experienced, especially in the path to transitioning from one genre or one medium to another in art, from performing to more illustrating?
Well, definitely a lot of self-doubt. I think there's a lot of pressure to be very specialized. If you're a singer, you're a singer. You don't do pop, you do opera. Everybody's very, very specialized in what they do, and you have to work very hard to be that. And so being diverse and following multiple different paths, even ones that are completely separate from each other, it was scary, and I was worried, like, well, did I just throw away all the time I spent in my undergrad? Is that for nothing now? Am I even going to make it? Am I going to spend all this money on a master's degree and then not be able to do anything with it? So just overcoming that and just following my instinct. I knew drawing made me happy. I knew I wanted to do it, and I knew I had to follow it. But it was scary.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, what do you do now to keep yourself sort of nourished? And, do you deal with resistances today, even in this fantastic job in a great city where you have a lot of artistic freedom? How do you keep yourself positive, balanced, all those things now?
I've had to learn to become assertive. I know a lot about illustration now, and I know what I'm talking about. So when I get pushback from any sort of creative director or art director, I need to be confident enough to say, no, I think we should approach it this way. Here's my reason why. So having that sort of confidence, and I'm now actually the leader of the whole illustration department here, and so trying to bring many different perspectives in and finding a way to encourage and lead some of the juniors in a way that doesn't overwhelm or dampen their spirits either.
Yeah. Yeah. So almost more like management or leadership.
Yes. Because you can be an incredibly talented artist, but if you don't know how to communicate what you're trying to say, if you don't know how to speak up for yourself, nobody's going to hear it.
And then when you talk about like maybe, challenges today or in the current position, it's about a little bit more about your own power, like believing your own talent, your own power and your own opinion, and then having a voice to that. I think women in particular struggle with that. So I guess in that moment, how do you overcome, or do you even, do you have any kind of sort of suggestions or kind of ways that you build that confidence, or you've been able to step into that power, or do you just do it?
Well, I tend to be pretty assertive by nature anyways. But there's absolutely been times where I go back and say, oh, I should have said something. I should have spoken up. And it's taking all of those moments, thinking about them and saying, all right, if this similar situation happens again, this is how I would like to address it, and then implementing that. Yeah. I also think ahead if I anticipate that there might be some pushback or resistance to any sort of concept. I sit and I'll spend a very long time analyzing, okay, these are some different ideas. These are some things that they could say. Here's different ways I could phrase it. And sometimes I'll even grab a friend and say, okay, I want to have a trial conversation about how this will go.
So you apply your acting. Yeah, and before we finish, if anyone is interested in checking out your illustrations or even buying something that you've created, because they are definitely unique and special, what would be the best way for them to find out more?
Sure. You can go to my website, which is oddjobart.com. And I also have an Instagram, and the handle is oddjobart.
Hannah, it was so great to catch up with you. So great to hear where you are in your journey, and just let our listeners learn a little bit about, the pivot you made from performer to illustrator. And then again, I just love how we started with that it's about being an artist. So thank you so much for sharing today.
Thank you for having me. This has been wonderful.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That interview was so fascinating, and I love hearing Hannah's sort of twisting and turning journey to the perfect place for her. And Elle, you were saying something earlier that I just think is such a good framework. Could you share that with our listeners?
The one about working hard?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I'm a hard worker too. So it really resonated with me that, Hannah brought up a couple times that she can be a little stubborn, and that she's really a hard worker, and that's really one of her gifts is the follow through diligence to get what she wants. And you can work really, really hard to get good at something. But good isn't good enough if you're in a very competitive industry or competitive art. And so going from good to excellent to genius is, I think, what led Hannah on her pivot to illustration, where now she's working in her genius.
Right. And it's so interesting because it was theater that she was working so hard for, but it was art that she had always done, and that her parents said, you are amazing at this. So I think this next part of the episode is going to be really interesting because it's Esther, Hannah's sister, who is sort of the antithesis to her in a lot of ways. And Esther talks about how different they are. But I'm excited because you were sharing earlier that in Esther's interview, Esther sort of approaches things the opposite way.
Right. Yeah. If you're working hard and you're pushing, you're kind of trying to muscle your way through things. And Esther does the opposite. She kind of like lets go and releases.
Even though she is naturally a hard worker.
Right. But she lets things, it was evident that things were kind of coming to her.
Right. Yeah. So I'm really excited for our listeners to get to hear this episode too, because I think it is sort of the other puzzle piece to figuring out who you are as an artist.
Hi, Esther, and welcome to She Made It.
Hi, Elle. It's so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So our guest today is Esther Cunningham, professional actress and educator. And she is in studio with me today, which is always a treat to have a guest in my home office. So what I'd love to do is just sort of share with you what we're going to talk about today with Esther. The big idea is, how do we discover who we are as an artist? But I remember meeting Esther. My first interview in the podcast today was her sister, Hannah. And as I mentioned, I met Hannah in an audition room in high school for Beauty and the Beast. And lo and behold, I also met Esther there, because Esther and Hannah were actually auditioning for the same part.
Mm-hmm. Really good for the sibling relationship.
Right. And you're the younger sister, so
Yes.
I'm sure that brought up a lot of like living in the shadow.
We worked through it.
Yes.
We're in a better place now.
Yeah, and both incredibly talented, but brought a very different energy to the part. And I hadn't met either of them, so it was a challenge in the decision making. And I was really an advocate of Esther, beautiful honesty and lovely voice. And what part did you end up getting?
A silly girl.
A silly girl. I do remember that. And you were quite amazing at that too. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, and then we had the pleasure of working together after that on other shows, other productions, but also you began working in my office.
Yes.
Doing some writing and sort of interning, helping with some personal management stuff, helping with the kids, but always just really enjoyed having you around. I love having artistic, creative people in my sphere of influence. And one really fascinating thing about Esther is that she is a professional actress. Mm-hmm. Yes, you are.
Yes.
But also you're incredibly smart. Right?
A
yes,
fun fact
you are.
is that I used to teach junior high Latin, which always shocks everyone.
Yeah, a full-time Latin teacher right out of college. Mm-hmm. But you just have a knack for teaching, and you've taught theater. You still do, correct?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
I work with Ensemble Theater and their education program, and they go out to local schools and they teach Shakespeare to kids with autism, and it's one of the most life-giving and inspirational things I've ever done.
That's awesome.
It's really fun.
Yeah, and you're really, really incredible at teaching.
Thank you.
I remember we did some co-coaching, and you're just really gifted. And I've been able to see you on a professional stage, acting, and you, it's just really beautiful to see you evolve and discover who you are as an artist. I kind of want to start back with, I know your mom. Mm-hmm. Your mom is also an educator.
Yes.
You were homeschooled. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit about what it was like growing up as a homeschool student, but sort of with the focus of how did your mom and how was creativity brought into your schooling in your childhood?
Well, I think that homeschooling sometimes gets a bad rap. And I think for us, it was really beneficial to our creativity because we were able to take our education experience and cater it to what we enjoyed. And so a lot of my homeschooling memories are field trips to the art museum and field trips to the symphony, and any excuse my mom could make to get us out to a museum and bill it as educational, she would take, which of course we loved because we didn't have to do math worksheets, so we were all about it. But we also were heavily involved in our church arts program, homeschooled, and then even once we transitioned to a private school. And I like to joke that, and it's not a joke, it's serious. My first acting role was at 3 months old. I was baby Jesus in the Christmas pageant. So I've been on stage since then. And my parents always loved it, and it was a creative outlet for them and something they really respected. And I think they think, and I agree with them, that the arts make you a fuller, well-rounded human being. And so they always encouraged us to consume and partake in as many artistic experiences as we could.
Yeah.
And that just kept growing and growing, and I kept feeding off of that and loving it more and more.
It's funny. I want to comment about something. So you talked about being 3 months old and being baby Jesus.
Yep.
So my daughter, Mirabelle, loves to say that she was on stage in utero.
Oh my
because
gosh.
Every show, every child, I had been on stage at least once while pregnant.
That's amazing.
So her first show was when she was about 6 months old. Six months.
What show was that?
Pre-birth. It was I Love You, You're Perfect, Now Change.
Yes.
So a very sort of bawdy musical where I actually appeared on stage in my underwear. So yeah, it was. But to go back to your mom, your parents both. Your mom is such a lovely, very creative woman, and I asked her. I had the opportunity to ask her. What were some of the things that she did as a mother of young children to nurture creativity? And her number one thing, and these weren't in any order, but the number one thing she wrote that I thought really struck me was to model creativity, to be the example so that we say children, the song from Into the Woods, careful the things you say, children will listen.
Yes.
They see what we do, not as much just hear what we say. So can you think of ways that she herself modeled creativity?
A lot of the examples I'm thinking of are ones that I see now that I'm much more self-aware. She teaches 4th grade and they cover medieval history. And so the way that I've seen her pour into her classroom decorations to make it a place that is beautiful to look at and warm and someplace that the kids want to be, and things to work with all different kind of learning styles. So she'll have things for kinesthetic learners and she has the things for visual learners. And her ability to think outside the box is something that she's always been good at. She got us all these fun cookbooks. I remember that a lot as kids, and there's pretty much always a tarp on our kitchen table so that we could feel free to use whatever markers and stamps and glue and anything, because she loved her kitchen table. Honestly, I think that's something that both my parents did, was make the house really beautiful. They love good art, and so we have all these beautiful lithographic posters, these vintage posters that are hanging in our walls. I remember I wasn't allowed to paint my room a couple different colors because my dad was like, listen, that's not actually going to look good. So let's take a look at these samples instead. So they would kind of help us curate our artistic sensibilities.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And Hannah, in her interview, spoke a lot about the books, the illustrations in the books. And
which makes sense that she remembers those much more, because that's a lot of her bent is the drawing.
Yeah.
And I remember a lot more going to the symphony. I remember going to children's theater. And
she talks about take your children to lovely places and talk about the beauty and uniqueness and give them, the summer camps or seeing the performances, all kinds.
Yeah. My mom, I don't know if she mentioned this, but she started this drama camp when I was in kindergarten, and it was like 1st through 8th graders. And she did it every year for about 10, 15 years. And I remember always feeling super special because I was in kindergarten when she started it, but because I was her daughter, I was allowed in it. So I did that every summer, and so she really modeled this. That's something worth investing your time in, because she would carve out not just the week of camp, but she would carve out the month leading up to it to make posters so that we could learn all of our camp songs. To clean the gym, because she wanted it to be a beautiful place where the audience came and saw it. And so helping her with those camps, really, I saw the work that goes into putting on a beautiful production and the value in doing that work well, so that you have an even better production and the audience is able to enjoy it even more.
Yeah. So, and then I love the theme that keeps coming up is just the beauty.
Yeah.
The aesthetics.
Yes.
and that it's not just the moment, it's the preparation, it's the whole experience that you're creating. I love that. So tell me how, or share with me how, because you went right from high school into more of a academic liberal arts college experience, graduated from Wheaton. And how, tell me when you left college and now you're a professional actress.
Yeah.
An academic, more academic directed degree. So share with me how that journey transpired.
Well, I think it was a journey for me that really started junior, senior year of high school. That was when the turbulence started like happening. And that's when you're applying to colleges and you're like, I need to know what I'm doing with my life. I need to know, especially if you're in an academic environment where it's like, and now we will do this, and then you do this, and then you go to college, and maybe you get a master's and a PhD. And
my son just left for college, and so we went through, it's very intense.
It is. And the thing you forget or don't realize at 18 is that you can change your major and you can make another choice, and that's going to be just fine. But you don't want to change it too many times, guys. You'll figure it out. So I did some camps and classes and with the Cincinnati Shakespeare Company and started to interact with professional actors and realized that I loved theater more than just for fun, more than just for entertainment. But it was a really scary thing to pursue that in a conservatory program, and a thing that I felt maybe I'm not really prepared for. I haven't been doing as much theater as other people. I had a really bad lisp at the time, and a couple directors who told me, like, you're never going to make it in theater because you have a lisp, so just stick to doing it for fun. But senior year, I got to be in like 4 different shows, and some of them overlapped, and I just felt this high and this energy. And so I knew that wherever I went to college, I needed to be able to do theater, even if I wasn't ready to commit to it professionally. And then a miracle happened, and someone came up to me and said, hey, I've seen you in plays. I'm a speech pathologist. Want to come over to my house for a couple weeks and try some speech therapy? Because I'm pretty sure I can remove your lateral lisp.
Wow.
And in less than a month, the lisp that I had lived 18 years of my life with was gone. I remember having huge identity crises. I was crying, and my parents were like, what's your problem? It's just a lisp. And I was like, no, but you don't understand. I've been the girl with a lisp, and now I'm going to college, and they're not going to know. And they're like, it's just a lisp. And I'm like, it's so core.
Yeah.
So it was a really big transformation and shift. And so I went into Wheaton College. And I remember my parents telling everyone at my grad party that I was going to major in English. And I was like, no.
I have a similar experience.
I might minor in English, but I'm studying theater. And so the theater program at Wheaton every program has pros and cons. And I think one of the big pros was that as part of a liberal arts education, you're reminded that you need to be a full human, and that the best artists are one who are aware of the world around them and are able to engage with it critically. And so I'm really grateful for my Wheaton education for reminding me that the part of being a great actor is being able to be aware of who you are as a human and aware of what you can bring and what you can do and aware of how the people around you interact. And I think my program was really good at that. While I may not have had all the different Stanislavski training and vocal trainings that some programs have, I think I got a really good understanding of humanity and art. And so then I graduated, and I was like, no, that's still a really scary thing to pursue it professionally. Like, that's too big of a step. I have a degree, but no, too much.
So you became a Latin teacher.
So I became a Latin teacher and a drama teacher, but a full-time Latin teacher. And while I was doing Latin teaching, I was taking an acting class on Monday nights, and I quickly realized that the acting class is what was feeding my life and feeding my soul, and that I needed more of that and less of the Latin teaching. Also, I'm so sorry to any Marcel parents listening right now, but I was sometimes a bad teacher, and I would just talk in accents because I was bored and I wanted to entertain myself in the room. Or When kids were taking tests, I was dying because there were so many humans in the room and no one for me to talk to.
Oh,
so I
that's
knew
funny.
that while I could love the kids and be present with them and give them an authority figure who cared about them and their well-being, that if they really wanted to pursue Latin, I was not the best fit for that program. And I'm grateful for my time. And I'm grateful for the lessons that I learned as a teacher. And those are lessons that I can apply in my theater education stuff now. But I hit this point, and I feel like a lot of making it anywhere is being fully present in every moment, regardless of whether or not you think that's the thing you want to do. Because when you're present and when you're engaged and when you're doing the work, the people around you see that and will help you, and you make friends and you make connections, and all of a sudden they go, hey, I have this thing, have you thought of, or hey, I can help you get there, would you like? And that kind of happened with me. I was doing this class and really engaged in it and really working hard. And my teacher goes, hey, the internship program here just lost a student. You need to send your resume tonight. And so I sent the email, and a couple weeks later, I came in for an audition and on the spot was offered this apprenticeship that has legitimately changed my life. I'm a month out of it and still processing all the things that happened during it. But it was one of those moments that you kind of knew was meant to be.
Yeah.
Because so many things had to fall in place that I couldn't have taken care of.
There's so much to unpack, Esther, with what you just shared. That was so beautiful. And I just want to go back because you said something and we kind of skirted past it, but you talked about how you had a list.
Yes. Yeah.
And what I do want to share with you is that when you and Hannah, your sister, auditioned for Beauty and the Beast, even though she was a senior, and the way that high school theater works, a senior gets the seniority, and so she deserved the part, and she was perfect for the part, and earned it.
Yeah,
but you were highly considered, but pretty much knocked out of the running because of the list.
Yeah,
and it was holding you back, and so then you had a beautiful person, a soul, step forward to help you overcome that, which opened doors. I love that you talk about how it created an identity crisis, that you were the girl with the list, even though it was holding you back.
Right. Yeah. It's funny how we put labels on ourselves that maybe someone one time made some slight comment, and to us we take that and then that is who we are, and we limit ourselves because of it. And it oftentimes takes someone looking at us to see us and say, I see that, and parts of it are true, and we can either remove it or adapt it or change it. And once you have someone help you, often you're given a new voice. For me, it was a new voice, literally. And we have to relearn how to speak.
Yeah.
And that is sometimes you feel like a little toddler all over again. For my speech therapy, it was a lot of like snakes slithering in the grass and all these like first grade little cartoon books to help me speak properly. But yeah, we put limits and fears on ourselves, and I kept bringing it up, right? Like I did this thing, I graduated high school, but I was too scared to do it professionally. I graduated college and too scared to do it professionally. And we need each other. We need a community. We need parents who encourage us and support us. We need teachers and mentors who see good in us. And I can't speak for everyone, but I need that aid and that assistance to be reminded that you put up blocks in your mind that you actually can overcome, or you can find a way around.
Yeah. And the other, that's so lovely. And I think one part that may be missing is that you also talked about being present and being intentional and being where you are and giving what you have at your best. And that's when the doors opened for you.
Yes.
That's when the opportunities came forward, the people came forward.
Right.
And then having the willingness to step through the doors. that's a beautiful testament to just trusting yourself. Can you say what because you were the girl with the lisp, do you have an identity that you cling to right now?
Right now I think I'm figuring it out. And I think that sometimes your identity in roles you play is similar to who you want to be, maybe. And the roles I've discovered I love playing are the like seemingly sweet girl next door who actually has a twist to her, some kind of little dark side, some kind of little secret and surprise. And I don't know that that's necessarily who I am, but I know that I can present myself as very like demure and agreeable. But actually, if you test me, I have a backbone. Like I've discovered a backbone. That's been fun. And I take a lot of pride in my education work, a lot of pride and joy in watching kids grow and take risks on their own, because it reminds me that I can do that too, that we're never done risk taking.
Mm-hmm.
And I take a lot of pride in the work that I do as an actor. I used to think I only loved Shakespeare because I really loved all the text work that went into his scripts. But as I've experienced more plays, I realized that there's a lot of text work to be done in other plays. So I do take some joy and I guess pride as well in the intellectual stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think right now I feel very much in a crossroads of figuring out, I'm in a transition phase. Well, who am I? Where am I going next? The internship was very structured and it was heavy work weeks. But I didn't mind because I knew exactly where I was going and what I was doing. And we had emails from our stage manager telling us where to be when and what to do. And do not touch the prop that way, you touch it this way. And so there was so many instructions and directions that you kind of could turn your brain off a little, because you're like, oh yeah, I don't have to think about that. I'm being told what to do. And now I'm in the world, and now I get to decide what my voice is as an actor and what my voice is as a person and what I want to stand for. And I haven't come to any conclusions yet, but I'm learning things and doing what I know brings me joy, and trying to remind myself to take risks and explore new places that I maybe beforehand would have been afraid to go to.
Yeah. And that is the nature of art, right?
Yeah.
Art is always evolving,
Yeah.
transforming. We are always growing.
Mm-hmm.
And as an actress myself, I'm still trying to figure out, as we change in
Right.
age, we evolve to different types and different roles. So I think for our listeners, I think the key is you talked about being intentional, but you also talked about being in joy.
Mm-hmm.
If it's joyful,
Right.
and it feels aligned, and and especially when you're doing education, you're serving and you're seeing the impact that you can have on other people, and so it's just staying on that path,
Right.
and then letting the doors open and walking through them. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I think a lot, and I don't know if you do as well, I think a lot in acting metaphors, because it's just the world I'm immersed in. But one thing that has really kind of stuck out to me as an acting lesson and a life lesson is that you're always auditioning for the future. So when you walk into an audition room, yes, it's about that play you're auditioning for and those people you see right now. But 10 years from now, they may remember you and they have a different play in mind. And they're like, oh my gosh, that one girl, that one time, and they will bring you back. And I think it's also true in life that if you give your all in that moment, and you make an impression in that moment, that's something that'll carry through in ways that you can't even possibly imagine. And it's almost more beautiful when that happens, because it's like, oh yeah, like I don't need to control everything, because sometimes the things that are outside of my control are the most beautiful and rewarding experiences.
Yeah. And it's a process of detaching from the results, because sometimes we get so caught up and we either critique ourselves or we put ourselves down if we have a failure. And in particular, acting is a series of failures to get to the yes. So we really do have to detach.
Yeah.
And I think I shared with you before we started recording, I just went into an audition. I'm kind of jumping back into the acting ring.
Right.
And my goal was, if I get cast, fantastic. But my goal was to show up and do my best,
Right.
and then let it go. And if we approach each day that way, and we take care of ourselves in the process, then we're doing the right thing.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So as we wrap up, one thing I would like to ask, I know that also with speaking with Hannah, that hard work is a trait of the Cunninghams.
Yes, the Cunningham principle.
Yeah. And I shared that, you have siblings that are all very talented in the arts.
Yeah.
And so I know you're a hard worker. I know you hold yourself to high standards. How do you deal with self-doubt, rejection, when, we can have a positive attitude and we can believe that this is the mindset we need or will guide us? But what about the days that it doesn't feel good?
And for me, I think there have been a few more days where it doesn't feel good recently. But one thing my teachers, Miranda and Jared, have taught me is they would say, write down the affirmations when you get them, because you need them on those dark days. So then you have, words are really important to me. I think as an actor, being someone academic, words really matter. And so I've gotten into the habit of writing down all the really beautiful affirmations that mean a lot to me. And so then I have them in one place where on those days I can be like, I'm feeling so bad. Maybe I'm not a great actor. I'm not creative. I can't do this. What am I doing? I should just go back to being a Latin teacher. I can pull out those pieces of paper and say, but these are true things that people have said. Feelings come and go. And as actors, we can get really immersed in our feeling. As artists, we can get caught up in them. But we need those true reminders to cling to. So that's been a big thing.
I call that contrary evidence.
Yeah.
What's the evidence contrary to what I'm really thinking about myself, whether it's something somebody else said to me or just a belief I did have on one day about myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I find journaling really effective. I have half-heartedly done the artist way. I've started it a few different times, which I know you know a lot about, Elle. But one of the big tenets in it is journaling 3 pages every day. And I think one comment she made is like, you can write out all the negative voices. And so I can just write on that paper all the negative things I'm thinking about myself. And then as you start to read it, you're like, wow, that's really cruel. And I would not say that to anyone I actually love and care about. And I don't think anyone would want to say that to me either. And maybe it's not true. And so once you get it out of your head and into the real world, that's really helpful.
I encourage you to, the next time you do that, to write as if you are your best friend. I try to think about that sometimes, like, what would I say to my best friend? Like when I'm beating myself up in my head.
Yeah. And I think one of the other things to get clarity is some kind of movement, whether it's yoga or I'm not a serious runner, but I have discovered that running around the city, because I live downtown and freaking love living downtown, but running around the city and to the river and back to my apartment is just really clarifying. You're breathing the fresh air, you're moving your body, and you're physically getting out of your head and into your body, because we can get so trapped in our thoughts. And then we can start to build up all these walls and fears that don't actually exist. And I think movement is a big help in getting out of that.
Esther, it's been great talking with you today.
It's been so fun.
Yeah.
Thanks,
and if people want to check out what you're doing, I know you're on Instagram.
I am. That's probably the easiest way to find out what I'm doing acting wise. So if you want to follow me at Essie Cunningham or search for Esther Cunningham. There aren't that many Esthers in the world.
Yeah.
There aren't many young Esthers, so I'm one of the few on Instagram.
I love that. And we'll have it in the show notes too,
Beautiful.
So people can find you. And
yeah.
Well, thank you. You've brightened up the studio today, and it was great to see you.
Yeah, thanks, Elle.
If you were inspired by what you heard today, I would love for you to share it with a friend. And also, reviews are the number one way that this podcast will be able to help more people step into their creative life purpose, and I would be honored to have yours. I'm so grateful you joined us for today's episode. I bet you're here because you know there's something more for your life. Whether you're moving into something creative or letting go in order to take that next creative step, I have something for you. My free guide to graceful transitions. You can find it at elzimmerman.com/transitions. And remember, if she made it, you can too.